Now let's get to the tea excitement. So the first, you know, the first of series of events that eventually leads to basically the revolution starting was the Gatsby Affair in 1772, which was the you gotta know that in the first years of the 1770s, the revolutionary spirit kind of quieted down, and the Gatsby Affair was important because it showed the revolutionary spirit was still existing. It was a rare act of rebellion when Rhode Island citizens, who had allegiance to the Sons of Liberty, seized a British commerce ship in the Delaware River, set it afire, and sank it. The fact that the British officials sent these criminals to courts in England instead of colonial courts really angered the colonists. In 1773, the British East India Company was almost bankrupt, and it sat on large storage of tea that it could not sell to England. So Parliament, in order to protect this company and help them survive from bankruptcy, introduced the Tea Act of 1773, where the British East India Company could basically sell tea to the Americas without any navigation taxes, and thus they could monopolize the tea trade. And thus, this angered the colonists for multiple reasons. Colonial merchants felt like they would be bankrupt because of the large monopoly. The East India Company offered to franchise a certain merchants' trade, and thus created a lot of resentment among the colonial merchants, which were an important part of the colonial society. The Tea Act revised sentiments regarding the representation because the tax on the colonists and not on the East India Company was a form of Parliament favoritism of their own companies, and not thus representing the grievances and the concerns of the colonials. Thus, many began boycotting the tea, and there was a big tea boycott, and it occurred throughout all the colonies. Even women, and this is important to note, that women became involved, and this was one of the involvements of women in the pre-revolutionary and revolutionary era. And the most important event in all this tea excitement was the Boston Tea Party, which occurred on December 16, 1773. So, background story, 3 East India Company ships were allowed to turn out of Boston's harbor. So on the night of December 16, 1773, 3 groups of 50 men, each dressed as Indians, boarded the ships, spilled them into the harbor, and it was a great political spectacle. And the British were obviously pissed off because it was all this tea that had been lost. So they imposed a policy of coercion by invoking 4 Acts in 1774. After the Bostonians refused to pay for the damages, the Parliament basically disbanded Boston's colonial assembly. They closed the port of Boston. They removed the governor of Boston, thus reducing self-governing. And they permitted the criminals to be tried in other colonies or in England. Also, what was introduced in the same year that also pissed off the colonists were the Intolerable Acts of 1774. It allowed the toleration of Catholics in the newly acquired Canadian territories. Many English colonists thought that this is a threat and the imposition of the Anglican Church's authority in the New World. So they thought the Anglican Church was grasping more power in the New World, when it was really, in a way, trying to help avoid any conflicts that would occur between the French Catholics and living in the Canadian territories and the English Anglicans who were going to move in. So the road to revolution was basically wide open after the Intolerable Acts and the Coercive Acts were introduced. And there was almost no way that the British could stop these sentiments. After these acts, the colonial assemblies began to seize full power. In Massachusetts, for example, Samuel Adams' Sons of Liberty became the main source of political and social power. The Continental Congress formed in September of 1774, after the government dissolved the Assembly of Virginia. The Continental Congress made 5 key decisions. They wanted a colonial union under British authority. They endorsed the statements of grievances that allowed England to control the colonial trade, but repeal all oppressive legislation since 1763. So they essentially said that they were okay with the British controlling the trade, but they just wanted all the post-French and Indian War legislation to be disbanded. And they called up for the creation of an army in case the British assaulted them. They formed the Continental Association to prevent all exports and imports from Britain, and they agreed to meet next spring to ensure the continuity of this organization. And now we get to Lexington Concord. In Massachusetts at the time, Minutemen were being trained in order to create a defensive army. General Thomas Gage, who was in charge of the British forces in Boston, knew that his army was too small, but wanted to kind of see if a show of force where the British would, repel the colonists or calm them down. Thomas Gage received orders to arrest John Hancock and Samuel Adams in Lexington. And there was a large supply of gunpowder in Concord, so the British were on their way to seize that supply. They marched 1,000 British troops to Lexington and Concord. Around the way, there were several battles between the Minutemen and the British lost 3 times as many men as the colonists did. And in the next chapter, we'll cover the actual Revolutionary War and what came about afterwards. But after this video, you should be able to know the causes of the French and Indian War, the acts that were introduced by Parliament that led to the grievances of the colonists, and thus the causes of the Revolutionary War as well. Thank you.